that. There are very few and far between real scale moments where you can really reach a huge critical mass. And therefore, the creative investment against engaging an audience at that scale is really, really difficult for any brand to put money behind.
One thing that the sort of digital revolution has led us to do is to think about things almost in terms of attribution, of following an individual and their path. And actually, you don't need to do that.
Hello, it's Omar Oakes, Editor-in-Chief of The Media Leader, and welcome to the studio we have for the Media Leader podcast, where we have a special series about the future of marketing, and we're very grateful to Bloomberg Media for supporting us to deliver this podcast series. And here with me is Duncan Chater, European MD of Bloomberg Media. Before I welcome our agency guest, our special guest, Duncan, it's great to see you. It's great to see you in person. Usually when we do this, we're usually doing it in either our office or over the internet. But thank you for joining us. So we've been talking about doing this series for a while. I mean, personally, thank you for supporting us doing this. But also, why did you personally want to start having a conversation about the future of marketing in 2024?
Well, hello. Thank you actually for inviting us. I think this all started out, Omar, when we did the event last year around
Future
Media, and we were talking a lot at that time about actually the future of the CMO's role. Some really, really interesting subjects came out of those discussions, and it really made us feel like actually the access that we have at Bloomberg to some of the data and trends around this information, as well as actually the conversations that we're having across the spectrum of the media and advertising landscape, really kind of felt like there was some good stuff there that we should be sharing with the broader industry, and actually getting the agency perspective and kind of challenging that. I think also selfishly, I think from our and my point of view, we're still building awareness around Bloomberg Media and what we have in terms of some of the services, platforms that we offer. And this then felt like a really good opportunity actually to share, have some really great conversations, and at the same time actually also try and articulate to the media industry some of the things that we have at Bloomberg and how we use it. So it's not just a kind of shared secret for some.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and if I might say so, it aligns really well with what we're trying to do at the Media Leader as well. So a bit of history. I know you're all fans listening to this and watching this, but a bit of history. So we were MediaTel News up until a couple of years ago, and we rebranded, and part of that was actually we wanted to talk about what's going on in the advertising industry from the perspective of media, and we do that, but also we're now... Media is so complicated, advertising is so complicated that we're finding that, I was speaking to an independent agency CEO the other day who he said, advertising doesn't have a divine right to exist. So much more of the activity, so much more of the spend is coming from non-traditional marketing activity, but it's affecting all of us in different ways. So I can't, I'm not just writing about what's going on in telly anymore. So it's so much more beyond that. And we don't claim to have all the answers. So to your point, exactly, we want to actually show our working. We want to practice in public, as it were. And I'm really glad that we can have a series like this over a period of 4 episodes we're doing, where we can really have a deeper conversation. Because as you say, it was a really good event talk that we had back in October for the Future of Media. Yes, we can do some articles about it, but let's actually have a conversation. I think it could be really powerful. We also have, to help us guide us through this discussion, is Steve Taylor, who is Executive Strategy Director at the agency VCCP Media. Steve, thank you for coming.
Hello. How lovely to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I've invited Steve to be part of this conversation as well, to actually get a perspective so Duncan obviously talking from the sell side of the industry, you're representing the buy side, the agencies and the advertisers. So it's really important to have you be part of this discussion. Firstly, what's an executive strategy director? What do you do at VCCP Media?
Do you know what? I think the role of strategy in media is in very much in line with what you were just saying. The role has really broadened out, and actually it's not necessarily just about, well, how many TVRs is it on the telly, and what's my reach in radio, and shall we put a bit of search underneath it anymore? It's a broad, holistic way of trying to understand in sort of planning terms how you connect with audiences wherever they might be, and what's the best way to do that, what's the most efficient way to do that, and how you get those audiences to think differently or do something differently from what they were doing to address a business problem. So it's really, really broadened out into much more of less of a media role and more of a marketing role, I would say.
Yeah, which is why we're having this discussion in the way that we hope to. I mean, how do you... I've always wanted to know, when I was a strategist, how do you stay on top of these emerging trends? And as you say, it's not just about, using traditional planning methods for TV and broadcast. How do you keep on top of all of this?
Well, the emerging trends, I think, trends present you with an interesting challenge. I think one way through, which leads to chaos and disaster, is to jump on every single trend going and try and sort of, see where it goes. And by the same token, you don't want to miss out on things that are actually becoming valuable. But I think the way that I certainly have always done it is I've looked for things that have got to a point of scale where an average person in the audience might be aware of that channel or that opportunity or doing that behavior. So it's not necessarily about the fact that you could, do, I don't know, something with in the metaverse, if we could allowed to use the M word this early on, but who's doing it? Is there any scale in it? Is there any value in it for advertisers at this point? And just also, I think, the other sort of thing that we look out for quite a lot is, even when there's volume there, that doesn't mean that it's the right place for a marketing effort. Sometimes marketing shoehorns itself into spaces that it's not terribly welcome. And I think actually you do advertisers a disservice by putting them in those spots, and you're much better off actually being relevant and on point and in places where to the audience it seems intuitive that you would be there, intuitive that you would be doing those things, intuitive that you as a brand would be supporting this or doing that, and the rest of it, I think, is being a ho-hum run-of-the-mill citizen of Earth and just consuming all these channels and doing these things and messing about with stuff and trying things out, and then you sort of get a taste for what's going to fly, what's going to work, and what's actually interesting on paper but not in real life.
One of the things that we notice is, or we focus on, I should say, is getting real clarity of what clients are trying to do, and that isn't always easy. So I think what we're talking here, when we're looking at new trends of platforms, that often kind of then answers the brief of the next kind of the new media thing, or something that's innovative and exciting, that's really going to win awards. And that often aligns then to building an individual's profile, a team's profile, or a brand. It doesn't necessarily deliver on actual results. So, we often, part of our kind of questioning and process when we're working with clients is really understanding the brand objective and then actually understanding the business objective, so we can help link back not just to marketing but back to the boardroom if we're operating at that level. But getting down to the detail and understanding what that client or what that particular objective is for that campaign is so important, to then understand how you use a platform, a channel, something new, and how much budget you should apply to that, which is, obviously very much in your sphere. But I think we're in, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but we're in quite a unique position as a media company because we operate across 9 platforms. So we're thinking about that all of the time and challenging how we work and operate. Are we really answering the brief?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, you are across 9 different platforms. I mean, that's why it was important for this first episode where we're talking about multi-platform campaigns in particular. So as we've just been talking about, you depending on what the client, the advertiser brief is, it just might make sense to do a certain platform or set of platforms in conjunction with one another than versus another one where, in the old days, it's just like, well, how many primetime slots do you want for your TV campaign? What is new in 2024 for marketers who want to attract new audiences? I mean, we just referenced telly a few times just now, particularly video.
There's so many different ways that you can use video to engage with audiences. I think what's new now is the number of platforms and ways in which the end consumer can actually engage with video, whether that's on your phone, on your TV at home, whether you're streaming on your computer, whether I'm thinking of more ways now. There feels like there's loads more, but
there are 3 new video platforms that have opened just in the time it took you to say that.
Well, exactly, and not only that, then obviously all of the different social channels as well that are distributing video content. So I think that there is no shortage now in terms of opportunities to use video differently, and that's even before we've mentioned AI and the opportunities around video creation. So I think loads of new and interesting concepts and ways that we can use video. I think the thing that we're seeing that's really, really effective, and this is probably aligned to our audiences that we work with, is data in video, so infographics.
Give an example what you mean.
So really, rather than actually just shooting people articulating messages, we're actually using data in well-designed graphics of data to tell a story. And I think some of that, if I'm being honest, some of it also is it's a really powerful way and new way of actually delivering content and messages and information that feels very trustworthy because it's just data. It's not anyone's perception or delivering a message. It's information. And we're seeing some real success and positive results and a lot of demand coming back from the market now of how we can use data in new and innovative ways to help tell different stories and challenges that clients have.
Yeah, I guess that's appealing to the strength that you have as not just a media company, but an intelligence company where you have all this access to data and all these data analysts, insight professionals that can help you deliver that, as opposed to trying to deliver an influencer-led campaign, even though you probably could do that, but it's not playing to your skill set.
Yeah, it's definitely in our kind of core set of skills that we have within the company, and lots of talent that work on that every day. But I think it's an interesting way that could be applied in lots of other content, actually.
I mean, Steve, how do you see this? I mean, looking at different campaigns for video in particular, how excited are you by TikTok in 2024 versus it's no longer the new thing, for example? Or are we overlooking some other video platforms, for example?
There's an awful lot of video opportunities, and they are proliferating, if anything. And you have got the social channels, and people are using them in different ways, not just top of the funnel brand awareness, but sort of mid funnel consideration, video content that does a job of explaining a proposition in detail, perhaps what you might have called in the old days almost infomercials. This is how it works, this is what it is. That idea of using sort of infographics and actually really explaining, or support videos as well, and even right down at the sort of very pointy end of the funnel of this is what it is, this is why you should buy it, and this is what you should do it now. And then across sort of all of the platforms that exist, I think we're going to see some interesting things in 2024. Social in particular, it's interesting to see that sort of the likes of TikTok and Meta more or less almost distancing themselves from the proposition of being a social platform, starting to talk about themselves as
entertainment companies.
We are entertainment companies, exactly that. I think, the ad load is an interesting thing that we might see change quite a lot this sort of in the coming 12 months. In fact, you're already seeing it on certain platforms. I think many would argue from personal experience. What's happened, a lot of the platforms have sort of reached a ceiling of monthly active users. There's nowhere left to go. They've got all the eyeballs. Okay, all the eyeballs have got, and actually we're spending less time, not more, with social platforms in particular, and on the web generally browsing, which points you to only one way really of making more money, which is to put more ad units into the same eyeballs divided by time space. Which means you get a denser ad load, or you get on a page, you get much more, many more ads. All part of, if I can say, what Cory Doctorow calls the enshittification of the internet. So I think you're seeing that. And then as a media planner, my mind then immediately turns to where are the quality moments? Who are the quality publishers that actually help me stand away from that, where the environment isn't too overcrowded, where the ad load isn't too much, where there is engagement from the audience, where the audience will feel that ad experience is more in stream with, whatever it is they're there to do, the content they've actually gone to consume. And I think, we'll see a lot of a tilt towards quality and maybe away from the volume. It's also falls very much in line with, there's a sort of switch in the industry, I think, away from efficiency and buying impressions at the cheapest possible rate to effectiveness and actually making an impact with the impressions that you do buy. And I think there's a whole bunch of things coming together that actually are pushing us in that general direction.
So I think it's interesting, isn't it? 'Cause if you go back and you think about those moments when video or TV was really the big scale play, a lot of investment was going into the advertising. The advertising was, and not all of it, but a lot of the advertising was really entertaining. The industry now isn't like that. There are very few and far between real scale moments where you can really reach a huge critical mass. And therefore, the creative investment against engaging an audience at that scale is really, really difficult for any brand to put money behind. So I think that it makes it really challenging. How do you advertise effectively against broad scale shows when they're there? And the point I think you were making, Steve, is actually like the best results are when the advertising feels natural, it feels aligned, it feels like it's offering me as the consumer value, it's adding to my experience, rather than, and maybe this is happening, I certainly can see it on some platforms, I'm like, oh, I haven't seen an ad there. And it's like got no relevance to my experience at that moment, and I'm struggling to link the ad to myself. So yeah. And I think that's what, like, really, I guess what we're trying to do at Bloomberg is, and we're investing a lot in video. Actually, funnily enough, we just launched our biggest video project yet, which is a series that we're running with Nikolai Coster-Waldau, or for any of you Game of Thrones fans out there, Jaime Lannister, who we had in Davos.
I'm the one person that doesn't watch that show.
We should. He was sporting a very nice moustache for his new program. But we've launched this show with him. It's called An Optimist's Guide to the Planet, and he's traveling around the world actually talking to businesses and individuals that are actually finding solutions around climate change.
And is this for a particular advertiser? It's an ad-funded?
It's a project that we are doing. It's a series of shows that we've launched with talent. It's our biggest one. There are sponsors actually that are part of this project that we're running. So Samsung and Kia are actually on board as part of that project.
So that's really interesting. So we've just been talking about whether there should be more bespoke projects in video that advertisers can get involved in. I mean, paint a picture for that particular project, for example. If I'm not one of the sponsors, but if I'm a prospective sponsor, maybe listening to this conversation, how would I expect to have a conversation with someone like you, the media owner, in terms of, okay, so I can't do that scale play as much as I could rely on before. How am I going to work with that media owner to do something that really is going to hit that target audience I want?
Yeah, so if you're an advertiser looking to align yourself with sustainability and certainly some of the innovation that's happening around sustainability, that's what this show does. So what we offer then is the platform to align your messaging to that show, but we also then create a product whereby you can actually shoot content with the talent, so Nikolai in this case, to tell a story that links with the TV show to the message that you're trying to deliver for your brand. Now, that obviously requires his buy-in, or the talent's buy-in in that case. It requires the buy-in of our editorial teams. And they're there really to support the advertiser and the agency to make sure that there's a real natural fit across that partnership.
So Jaime Lannister, actor, I mean, you couldn't call him an influencer, but it sounds like you are doing that job in between where you're getting the output of an influencer. You're helping to facilitate that.
Absolutely. And Nikolai he's a UN ambassador for climate change, so he's very, very credible in that space. He's super passionate himself. which is why he wanted to do the show as well. But that's an example. And for us, like the part of investing in video and these shows, which are free to view across all platforms, it's an enabler for us to reach a much broader audience, so that we can bring potential consumers back into the Bloomberg ecosystem, and they can start to learn about the content that we have, because we service really, leaders, business leaders, country leaders, professional investors, really who want to kind of make a change and have a positive impact on the world.
Yeah. I don't want to dwell too much on video, because we've actually got a whole episode dedicated to video later on in this series. But just to tie it up for now, Steve, I don't hear so much about influencers in terms of. I remember 3 years ago, just before the pandemic, everyone wanted to, work with an influencer agency and work with influencers directly. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you still see that as a growing area of video in particular that marketers would do well to get more involved in? Obviously, it depends who you work with. It can be kind of a risky space sometimes, can't it?
Yeah, I think there's still very much a role for that as a tactic. It very much depends on the advertiser, what they're trying to do, who they're trying to align with. There was a point at which I really sort of fervently believed that there was no such thing as an influencer who wasn't a celebrity. And then, of course, a lot of the influencers became celebrities in their own right. And it's the same, set of rules, I think, that you go by regardless of whether you're working with a TV actor or you're working with, someone who's doing YouTube videos in their bedroom. What are the values of that person? What are they talking about? Does it align? I think the question for advertisers quite often is, where's the return on investment of doing it? What does the scale look like? And I think in some senses it makes more commercial sense than in others. If I was British Airways trying to get people to fly economy to Ibiza in the summer, I'm not sure I'd bother working with influencers. I might just do a broadcast campaign. If I was British Airways trying to persuade frequent business class flyers between London and New York, then an influencer, in inverted commas, might be exactly the way to go if you could find the right person who talks about that. If you want to align yourself with something like sustainability, the example that Duncan's just talked about, I think that could be a great way to do it. And, I'm not sure it is, and it's not influencer in the old sense, but it is influencing through aligning with the values of that person, because they are a UN ambassador, because their sort of their stated case is that's their view about the world already. So if you can then align with that and say that's also our view about the world as a brand, and it's meaningful, which is important, then I think it's quite a sophisticated way of going about actually being really meaningful to audiences in quite a targeted way.
Yeah, I think that word meaningful in particular you just hit on is quite powerful. I want to move on to how marketers can be more strategic with the way that they use data to target audiences across all these different channels, so moving beyond video. And yeah, I've really struck upon this word meaningful, because there is so much data you could use. Duncan at the top of the conversation was talking about the risk of being attracted too much to the shiny new thing. I mean, 2024... Steve, what data do you think let's start with, is maybe being underutilized or underappreciated, that marketers maybe should be focusing more on?
The whole saga around third-party cookies and third-party cookie audiences has actually had us as an industry take our eye slightly off the ball, because I think there's a lot of advertisers out there who've thought, I don't have an awful lot of data, I need to buy audiences. And they've not really examined the data that they do have, first-party data. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean a lot of individual level records for what you would call PII data, sort of credit card numbers, telephone numbers, email addresses. But you might be an advertiser with a lot of first-party data that's at an aggregate level. So it might be footfall, it might be SKUs, it might be trends in what's selling, what's not selling. And I think one of the first places I would look as an advertiser is, what data have I actually got myself before I start to look at where else there might be other sources. So I think a lot of advertisers have much more data than they think they have. It just isn't necessarily in the bucket of PII and immediately addressable. The second thing I think that we are seeing a lot of growth within is what you might call geotemporal targeting.
Explain.
So the geo part of it is good old-fashioned heat maps. Find out whether your audience is over-index and under-index and create yourself a little heat map. That's the geo part. That obviously flexes over time. That might be within an hour, within a day, within a month, within a week, within a season, within a whatever. And that's the temporal part, the time element of it. And what we're seeing some quite sophisticated partners that we work with doing now is basically building these geotemporal heat maps and building up audiences around that. It doesn't have to be for digital. You can burn those heat maps out at quite a specific geo level, so it can inform, for example, your out-of-home plan or your TV plan, because you can do that through connected TV, or you can do it through AdSmart, or you can do it, that sort of way. So it isn't just a programmatic digital activation. It can be even in the traditional out-of-home world. So we're seeing that. And then, of course, I think the other big area that I'm sure the sort of deprecation of third-party cookies is going to force a lot of people's hand on is a greater use of contextual targeting and actually relying on publishers. So we've sort of, the challenge with publisher data, I think, as a planner has always been, it looks pricey when you compare it to maybe some other routes into activation. But again, I think we're tilting towards quality and away from efficiency and more to effectiveness. And that sort of shines a much happier light on publisher data. Publishers know their audiences better than anyone else. Your next challenge then is, well, okay, outside of a niche audience, how do I get the scale? And don't I end up working with just different walled gardens? To a certain extent, that's true. But I think, again, in that tilt towards effectiveness and away from efficiency, we're starting to worry a little bit less about combined reach and frequency, and we're starting to look at actually what can I do with different audiences in different publishers with their data that says these people are specifically interested in X, Y, and Z. So I've got that over there. That's part of my plan, and it's doing this comms job. And I've got this other part of my comms job over here, which is, with maybe a different set of publishers or, different walled garden, which is doing A, B, and C instead. And actually, I'm less worried about the sort of the overall reach and frequency and more interested in the combined effectiveness of that as a, strategic way of using data to get a set of messages across and take people on a communications journey.
Yeah. And just to be clear, by publisher, you're talking about specifically news brand, magazine,
yes,
publisher, as opposed to more platform agnostic. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thankfully we have someone who represents publisher here. Let's turn what Steve's just said on its head. So I want to be more strategic with how I use data. My media agency strategist has just told me that publishers know their audiences better than anyone else. So help me out. Help me sell that internally to the organization where, okay, prove to me your audience is better than anyone else. I keep reading about how no one wants to read anything and everyone's on TikTok all day.
Absolutely. So we're lucky because I guess for Bloomberg, we are a data company anyway. That puts us in quite a unique position. But we would look at a number of different things. Actually, we'd start with looking at financial data. So from the Bloomberg terminal itself, that actually tells us a lot about the industry, what's happening, and really to understand some of the kind of, like I mentioned beforehand, the business impact and what might be really important for that business. We then go into, after that, start looking at the audience data. So our first party audience data and third party data, actually. So we're looking, we tend to do a monthly report that focuses on 5 of our typical key audiences. So C-suite, government officials, professional investors, high net worth individuals, and we'll offer quite a deep dive into how that audience is behaving, what they're consuming, what they're interested in, and a little bit of context as to why, what's happening, which we can kind of glean from all of the tools that we have. So we'll take all of that data. We'll then start looking beyond Bloomberg. So we have a tool that we've had for a number of years that we call AIQ. And this tool scrapes data from 150,000 other B2B publishers. We inject our first party audience data into that, and then we expand it. So we have a look. If you're telling me you want to reach CEOs, I'll be able to tell you what they're doing on our platform and why, but then I'll have a look more broadly across the advertising sector and B2B and just check, is that the same? What might then, if we're going beyond and outside our own platforms, is that message still going to resonate? Is that kind of still of interest? So that's all important. And then we might bring in, we've got another tool, which is like a brand health study. And that helps us understand what's happening with all of the brands globally and some of the kind of key messages that we might want to align to different audiences to give that brand the best chance of making impact and standing out in its competitive set. So a huge number of tools that we use in that process. I mean, it's great when agencies come to us. If that happens at the earliest stage, that gives us the best opportunity to obviously tailor that messaging specifically for our platform. But we also understand that that isn't possible in every brief, right? And the other thing is time. We haven't really spoken about time.
Yeah.
Like how much time, how efficient do we have to be? Actually, is this campaign? It's just, we know exactly what we want. We want to engage with C-suites. This is the creative. How can you help us do that? And our teams are working in the background to take some of those kind of common challenges and objectives and build and refine the very best ad products to engage with those challenges that we see coming up time and time again. So we've got scale and efficiency that we can deliver quickly, and then we've got a more kind of deep strategic approach.
I began this conversation by talking about how media is changing, marketing is changing, and one of the ways we really saw that over the last 5 or 6 years is where you have this trend of chief marketing officers at a lot of organizations, particularly airlines, finance, where their roles were changing into chief customer officers, chief product data officers. That the role was more encompassing as to actually look at the data that they have and leveraging that. Steve, do you find that there are different levels of clients who are just frankly just better able to make use of their first party data, and how does that change the conversation that you have with them?
There are, and I'd love to be able to tell you that there's an obvious pattern to it, and you can predict when someone walks through the door whether or not it's going to be a data-rich story or not. But sadly, there isn't. One thing that you do find is there are advertisers who have their own data science, their own in-house data science teams. And actually, if you can begin to open a conversation with the data science team, and particularly if you can get data science talking to data science, it's a big shortcut to finding out where the pots of data are, exposing those pots of data, using those pots of data, and also, actually, it's a real shortcut to being able to have a much more grown-up effectiveness conversation with that team quite often, because they've got a good idea of the metrics that really matter in that business, and they also know how to model what success looks like. So a lot of the conversation is just shortcut immediately if you can get data science talking to data science. But you can have very, very large advertisers that haven't a clue, and you get small, actually often I suppose in many cases smaller, scrappier, newer, often D2C, brands actually have a data scientist somewhere who's pretty sharp and knows how to model success and knows how to share data and make use of it.
Oh, that's fascinating.
It's about alignment though, isn't it? I think, and you can see in some of those companies when all of their teams are aligned and sharing information and using it with the same end goal, like everything becomes a lot easier because you all understand what you're trying to do. I think when it gets more difficult is if you've got a marketing organization that isn't talking to the rest of the business, they're trying to do something, but then they're getting feedback from the board. That's not working because it's not connecting to, again, the business objectives. Then you get all of these mixed messages. Yeah, and for us in the advertising world, it's a nightmare because you're a month into a campaign and the KPI switched, or, it happens. And obviously we're living in volatile times. So sometimes we have to be nimble and change up. But I think that clarity across an organization is really, really, really critical in driving results.
Let's give something actionable for our audience. How do you execute cross-platform campaigns well? Being mindful, obviously what's underpinning a lot of this is audiences are becoming more fragmented. So what does being cross-platform well look like nowadays?
What I think doing cross-platform well for me is driving incremental results, like with efficiently. So we track all of our campaigns. What we see is if you run a campaign across 3+ platforms, typically we're driving about 38% increase in awareness scores. So really good. And that's backed up, actually, if you look even at some of the industry studies, I think it's Ipsos, actually, in terms of reach of CEOs, again, for Bloomberg, because this is fresh in my mind, 3+ platforms gives you 31% increased reach. So really good. And DigiDay, the stats are all coming fresh to me, Omar. DigiDay just recently, they also announced, again, multiple platforms. I think it was 3, 41 or 42% brand recall. So I think...
But which platform specifically?
Well, I think then you have to understand the audience. So for us, we would go back to exactly what I was saying beforehand. We run all of that data. If it's C-suites, we would go in, or CEOs. Well, let's understand, what does their day look like? Typically, like the CEO they'll be up early in the morning. I'm generalizing here.
Yeah,
but
4 o'clock doing yoga, marathon.
But then the information, they're looking for information to set up their day successfully. So then we need to understand, is that a good time then to start putting messages in front of them? Well, it depends what the message is. So we can then decide, what's the message? Where does it fit in well? What's the objective of the campaign? And if it's reach, then probably video is going to play a part. We want to use video because it's a good way at driving scaled reach. But it's also a good way of telling complex stories. But we want to then combine that with other platforms that we have. Events is a fantastic way for us of connecting audiences, of telling really, really deep, complex stories, and also building profiles of individuals. CEOs stand out actually in all of the work that we do. If you've got a really, really strong CEO in your organization, it elevates a lot of the scores and quite often also the financial performance of companies. So the more that we can do to actually help those CEOs build and drive and grow their profile, but also communicate their vision both externally and internally, super important. So we're looking then at what are the platforms that are going to help us to do that, and what's the right mix. We might even use something like radio. So radio, again,
don't say even good. Radio, we love radio.
Well, but within that mix, we obviously love radio, but I think we did some research recently and actually found out that that's a really good way to hit CEOs. They're listening to Bloomberg Radio on their way in. Quite often they'll travel in a car into work, and that's a really, it's a great way. You've got a moment there where you can deeply engage with that audience. That's not going to show up though on data that we're running typically. So that's about us then having that real deep understanding of the audience and how they behave and operate, and what their daily routine is like.
Yeah, if you want to reach media agency and media owner CEOs, you can always come on the Media Leader podcast, because you better believe that when they say something, when I say something they don't like, they email. Steve, broad brush for, I guess, consumer marketers specifically, what does cross-platform done well look like this year?
I think using different platforms in the broader sense of the word media platform is generally speaking an important principle when you're pulling any plan together or any strategy together. I think the media multiplier exists not just because of reach. It also exists because you get people in a different mind frame, you get people in a different mindset, but also you get people to process a message differently because of the modality you've triggered when you were delivering that message. Whether it might be a very emotive piece or video that you've used, which has really sort of hit people kinesthetically without them being able to actually tell you much even about, what the ad was about. We know that a lot of brand advertising works in that deep emotive sense. It's all right brain, it's not left brain at all. Similarly, you might then actually have quite a hard-hitting print message, which is, which is much more left brain and much more logical and much more about offer. That might be quite short and punchy. You might have something in between that exists on a platform like radio, where it's quite an engaging tale, and it's more about that consideration piece, and you might get people that way. And it's less really the incremental reach. We always worry about reach, of course. We always worry about reach, and we always worry about scale. But I think sort of a lot of the old thinking about just sort of just 1+ cover or 3+ cover. Even within a channel, I think you wrote something, in fact, just literally last week about sort of the shift, in sort of TV planning, from sort of thinking about that and how that planning is changing. It applies to cross-platform as well. I don't think we need to worry so much about whether or not we've hit people once or twice or 3 times or 6 times or 12 times. I think what we need to worry about is what's the combined effect of all those impressions, all those impacts, and the different platforms in which they were delivered, and the combined nudging of that person towards making a brand decision.
Specifically, we've talked a bit about already, but specifically new audiences. You want to acquire those new audiences.
Yeah.
How does that change your consideration?
I think with new audiences, if you're bringing incremental audience, or you're attracting incremental customers, one of the mistakes one of the easy wins I think we don't make enough of is using negative targeting, which is just simply not contacting the people that are already customers. And it rarely do you actually see it on an existing plan.
And why is that?
It baffles me, if I'm honest, Omar. I don't know why that wouldn't be the first place you would start, would be to not contact the people who've just bought from you, not contact the people that won't be in market for the next however long, because, if you can identify people, or if there is something particular about their audiences, go elsewhere. If you know that you've already saturated the Northwest, it doesn't even have to be a digital thing, right? If you know you've saturated the Northwest, if you know you've got loads of customers in the Northwest, why not try the Northeast instead, rather than just sort of, spreading your efforts far and wide. So one of when it comes to new audiences specifically, I think, one of the first things is think about who you've already got and how to avoid wasting impressions on them. And the second thing, I think, almost go back to the very sort of fine targeting that you can get through, whether you want to call them micro influencers or you want to call it these micro audiences, very niche sort of targeting opportunities that you can get. There might be a twist in that, so if you have already got everyone's buying the sports car, but you want to sell the saloon, then, look at the profile of those people who've bought the sports car and fish elsewhere. They're reasonably straightforward, simple techniques, but you don't see it very often.
Same question for you, Duncan, but I'm also interested if you have a view on whether there's a fragmentation in terms of media owners. Steve just mentioned micro influencers. That everyone, there are lots of channels out there. You mentioned people doing YouTube videos on their bedroom, but there are also B2B publishers which have smaller but very engaged audiences. Do you think it's also a media issue where it's easy to buy on a big platform, but if you want to reach different audiences across smaller platforms, they frankly don't have a joint sales offer? Do you think that something needs to happen in that space?
Possibly. I think the issue here is time, though, again, really. Probably if you were looking at this as just an agency thinking, how could I deliver the most meaningful results for a campaign with time and efficiency and cost of that time taken out of it, you'd go for very tailored solutions. And actually, it's not just micro influencers. We all, publishing companies have them. We have very, very specific events, newsletters, content that talks directly to a very distinct group of individuals. So I think when we're building a campaign, and particularly when we're thinking about new audiences, you've got to have a compelling story, and you've got to communicate quite deeply about what you offer as a brand or what service you offer to connect with that individual consumer. You can't always do that quickly unless you've got something really new and compelling that just jumps out and goes, wow, I've never seen that before. I need that. That's going to make a real difference to my life or my job or my company. So, I think it's about being tailored. But for me, actually using different platforms, and it's really reiterating what Steve said, it connects in different ways with individuals. So it really reiterates the message that you want to deliver more impactfully. So I think if you can use the right mix, It's great. Even we've seen at events, we've done at some campaigns, and building then experiences at the events, which is building on of just having that human interaction, is another way of really deepening the brand storytelling. That's great for new audiences. Like if they don't know your brand, they come and then they can actually like have that lived moment and really get into the weeds of understanding your offering, your service, whatever you do. So I think actually building like more variety in the communication strategy is super important.
Yeah. Okay. We've talked a lot about, you just mentioned communication strategy, but what about, let's give our audience something actionable to close out with. What are the best tools that are available, off the shelf, and what do marketers need to know about them?
I mean, I would come back to obviously the platforms that we use, and then therefore that can be applied across the industry. But it comes down to, for me, understanding the audience first, business marketing objective, and then really understand the audience, being really, really clear on what we're trying to do and how we're going to measure it. So what success looks like. And then I think relying on the services of the companies that you're using to actually build the best solutions to do that effectively.
Yeah. Steve?
I think we've managed to avoid talking about AI so far, haven't we? I'm going to.
Wow.
I know.
We've also
time.
We've also managed, and this is deliberate on my part, not talking about the distinction between brand and performance. But yeah, let's move on from that. Yeah. So you're going to suggest AI?
I am going to suggest using AI to transform your analytics and to transform the way you approach effectiveness.
How do you do that?
You go and build yourself a very light analytics stack based on open source software, open source code. You go to GitHub, you find yourself the Robin model that Meta uses, or you find the Orbit model that Uber uses, or you find one of those light MMMs, or you find yourself a data scientist fresh out of their MSc, and you point them at the task and you say, here is a portfolio management task. I've got 2 questions for you, dear data scientist. How much should I spend and where should I spend it? And you set them to work on that. And actually, I think analytics is another thing that we're going to see a transformation of in 2024, driven by what's happening in just very accessible, light code that anyone can use to actually effectively do their own market mix modelings and do it really quickly and turn around and actually then use that as a platform to use the other main tool that I think you've got in your armory as a marketer, which is test and learn, and doing test and learn properly, proper A/B experimental testing to see what works. And it then becomes not about reach, not about frequency, not about, what type of content. What you can do, you can look at all of that, and you can look at all of it very quickly and begin to make iterative optimization, business marketing decisions based on the data that you've got.
And just to be clear, so rather than asking ChatGPT, tell me how to spend my media budget, you're actually saying take what is open source out there, the guts, the brains of a ChatGPT like platform, and actually build something in-house so all the data stays within your organization. You've
got to do that, and I think you do need domain expertise as well. You can't just, unfortunately, it's not just a black box you can chuck stuff into and the sense will come out. You have to understand how media works, and you have to understand your audience and how your marketing works. Otherwise, I think if you just leave it to the maths is wonderful and it's very quick and it's effectively free, but it will make silly decisions if you don't have a domain expert saying, actually, that'll never work for us because, mathematically it looks right, but look, I can't spend £1 on TV, or whatever the model is that suggests that you do.
I think it's important then you're constantly challenging the tool, because I'm guessing even just as I'm like, when you build something like that, the data that you're accessing is either openly available or your own data, which is your own customers, but then that leaves out maybe a lot of useful data outside that are stuck behind walled gardens or kept by different partners. So how do you challenge the thinking and test it against other techniques all of the time to drive your thinking, your business is thinking, and your approach to maximize things. Because I think with all of these tools, as they develop and learn, everyone's developing and learning. You've got to constantly keep changing your game and to stay ahead of the technology and the competition, and make sure you're using all of the data and access that you can get your hands on.
Yeah,
directly and indirectly.
Yeah, and there's a change of mindset, I think, involved in it as well, because actually one thing that the sort of digital revolution has led us to do is to think about things almost in terms of attribution, of following an individual in their path. And actually, you don't need to do that. The data's helpful if you've got it, but you don't have to have it. What you can look at is the patterns of things that happen rather than the actual individual records. And that's a bit of a change in mindset, I think, for a lot of people.
That was really interesting. I've learned a lot, and as usual, whenever I learn a lot, I have more questions than answers. So we'll hope to address some of them in future episodes. Duncan, people can just reach me by messaging me on LinkedIn, and if you want to email me, it's omar.oakes@uk.adwanted.com. But what's the best way for people to contact you if they want to follow up on some of the things they've heard in this conversation?
I'm also on LinkedIn, so happy if people want to message me on LinkedIn, or they can email me at Bloomberg, which I think you can find pretty easily off the website. I'm happy to take any questions.
And what about you, Steve? You should be. Are you an influencer? You should be if you're not already a media strategist influencer.
Yeah, I think I definitely must be. Surely by now, mustn't I? I don't know. I think if anyone wants to reach me, LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to do it. Or you could drop me a note at s.taylor@vccp.com.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for listening and watching out there. Please do join us for episode 2 of the Media Leader podcast special series of Bloomberg Media, where we're getting into data insights, what marketers need to know for 2024. If you're listening to this for the first time or watching, please do subscribe to our podcast feed and our YouTube feed. But otherwise, catch everything we're doing at themedialeader.co.uk. Thanks once again to Bloomberg Media for helping us put on this special series. We're very grateful. And to our wonderful production partners, Trisonic, who work with us on the Media Leader podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.